We are facing a tsunami of cucks, beta males, white knights, simps, and men with a savior complex. I just really wanted to start with that. There is a problem. There is a problem, obviously. And I'm not entirely sure what the solutions are, but I know that you can only create a solution when you define the problem and you take a little look at it. What I think has happened to humanity in general is that we went from barbarism, very dangerous, very low resource environments where physical strength was enormously important. It was a matter of survival. And then we went through a process of technological progress where we created less and less barbarism, safer and safer environments with greater and greater resources available with greater and greater ease. And you might think, well, how could that possibly be a bad thing? Because that's not all we did. We didn't just create a better, safer world. At the same time as doing that, especially in the last 150 years, once the Industrial Revolution has gotten underway, we have airplanes and machine guns and telephones and ways of killing people at conveniently long distances where you don't have to hear them dying or smell them. It's changed the platform by which humanity draws its sense of self. And the place for men in that changing landscape obviously has changed. And I'm not saying this is a good or a bad thing. There are good and bad elements of it for sure, but I don't really want to get into that just now. I just want to state this from a purely systems thinking point of view, like an engineer. Okay, here's the machine. This is what it's produced, and that's it. As we've moved into greater and greater levels of civilization and more ease of access to resources, so it's, the average working class person in your country, in my country, in most of the Anglosphere, enjoys a level of luxury on a daily basis by certain metrics that only ancient successful emperors and kings would have known, in terms of safety, in terms of access to food, in terms of access to entertainment, in terms of access to comfort, the capacity to control your environment, control the temperatures of the environment, the capacity to sleep knowing that it's very, very unlikely that invaders are likely to march through your town and smash your brains in. As that has happened, the reliance on men as providers of raw physical strength goes down. And so the power dynamics have shifted. And sometimes it's in positive ways and sometimes it's in negative ways. That's a conversation for a different day. I'm just saying it has shifted. It has shifted. This creates an environment where you have competition for finding partners that has dramatically changed in just the last 50 years alone. The expectations, the boundaries around acceptable behavior. In recent years, in the last 7 or 8 years, I've even had protracted and emotionally charged arguments over what constitutes cheating. So the rule book for how men and women relate to each other and what isn't permissible behavior seems to have been thrown out. This is confusing for everyone. This is very, very confusing for everybody inside of the scenario. And it's almost as if every relationship or every individual has to create their own rule book. And that doesn't really work because, as I was going to say before about the Industrial Revolution and just giving us more options, that's not all technological progress has done. Because within that, you have corporatism and consumerism, which is highly incentivized to propagandize and to mess with people's minds and their emotions fundamentally. So that corporatism, that consumerism, that cronyism is there alongside all of this technological progress. And these powers are not interested in human emancipation. They're not interested in human peace. They're not interested in humans getting along and loving each other and, being in love, knowing intimacy, knowing safety, procreating, and throwing their genes forward into the future, which is what we are, hardwired to do. These powerful forces, these powerful entities would prefer you separated, not in love, mentally ill, mentally disturbed, emotionally upset, feeling isolated, because it's easier to control a population that is fragmented. It's easier to control and sell to a population that fundamentally doesn't feel very happy. Let me say it another way. Imagine, a utopian scenario where you have a good partner and you have a good family and you are in a community of good partners and good families, and you're living in a life where basically everybody is on the same map. What do you do for fun? What do you do for pleasure? Let's say it's a peaceful environment. Let's say you live inside of a peaceful country. Probably what you would do is spend time with your friends and family and loved ones in nature, enjoying each other's company, largely speaking. That sucks for me as somebody who is trying to control you. And that sucks for me as somebody who's trying to sell you stuff. If you're just enjoying your life and occasionally taking a trip to the woods or a trip to the beach to have a little picnic, how am I going to sell you these really expensive sneakers? How am I going to sell you the really expensive doohickey? How am I going to glue you to this? How am I going to keep you focused? I can't. So one of the things that we're going to have to wrap our heads around, and I'm not, a political person, I'm just saying from a systemic point of view, from a philosophical point of view, these things are happening and they all impact what is largely referred to as the sexual marketplace. It's an unfortunate term, but it functions. How are you going to find a partner in this environment where everybody is propagandized to and marketed to at a level that has never been seen before in human history? How are you going to find a healthy mate and create safety in an environment that not only encourages narcissistic psychopathy, but rewards it? And how are you going to find a mate and how are you going to create a family in an environment where every other person in that system, because none of us is an island, we're pack animals. As mammals, we live together in groups. It's no good. It's not a solution for you to say, well, I'll go off. I'll do my own thing, or I'll do my own thing, or I'm going to create my own family with its own rules, and we're just going to try and keep the world outside at bay. That's, I guess, a temporary solution. I mean, it's better than nothing, but that's not really a long-term solution. And it's enormously stressful for the people involved because they now live in opposition to every single cultural tribal force that exists. They have to resist it. So in this scenario where it's highly narcissistic and highly psychopathic, and there's been this power asymmetry shift that seems to be tinged with a spirit of vengeance, like men must be punished for historical wrongdoings. Masculinity is evil. Because men do most of the violent crime in the world, therefore violent crime is the fault of men. And I've heard intelligent women, friends of mine have said this to me. And I'll look at them and I'll go, like, all men. Yes, all men. So half the human population is responsible for all the evils in the world. Yes. So just to check, there's never been a female human trafficker. There's never been a female abuser. Well, yes, but these are outliers. It never really happens that way. And what that is, beyond the fact that statistically obviously it's simply untrue, is an example of a kind of infantile, primitive defense mechanism called splitting. If you are altogether bad, I am altogether good. So where I've been most known to the extent of being in the public space, it's for talking about narcissism. But we've all known perfectly well for many years now that a tremendous number of people who say my partner is a narcissist really don't even know what the word means, and they're just casting it as a slur. All of this taken together makes the situation very, very complicated, and there's no obvious solutions that I can see. There's no clear solutions. That doesn't mean they won't emerge, but it means we have to look at the problem and then actively expend energy in resolving the problem somehow to the best of our ability. Why are so many men acting like what we would call beta males or white knights or simps? I think it's just desperation. I think it's out of pure unconscious desperation. I mean, you can look at IQ as well. Like IQ is going to be a factor in it. But the reason why men are doing this, or so many men, not all men, but so many men end up putting themselves in that position, is because they've decided that to get a little bit of something is better than getting nothing at all. Of course, if you can think at a systems thinking level, you realize if an awful lot of men are engaged in that behavior, it has a reflective effect on women. It affects how they perceive themselves and it affects how they behave. It really takes the guards off, in many cases, reckless behavior or irresponsible behavior or behavior lacking in accountability, introspection, or any kind of desire to place moral integrity back into the scenario. Because the tsunami of, as I said in the beginning, the tsunami of simpery and cocks, that is an environment where I can say, well, no matter what I do, I am ensured validation. I am ensured that I can recruit with very little effort, very conveniently, a multiplicity of people who will tell me I'm right. That, I must tell you, is not an environment that encourages mental health. That is not an environment that encourages sanity, maturity, individuation, and growth. That encourages a kind of, Jung called it the puer eternus, which is usually translated as the eternal child, but strictly speaking, puer means boy. Aleister Crowley defined it as the aeon of Horus, the age of the eternal child, the eternal son. And we have the term Peter Pan syndrome, and we all know guys who act like Peter Pan. They're boys who never want to grow up. But have you noticed how we haven't yet defined linguistically the same effect for women? Women who refuse to grow up. Women who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s and up, who are still acting from a set of coordinates that they picked up in high school. They literally are operating from a worldview and a set of coordinates that hasn't really adapted since the age of 16. Why hasn't it adapted? Because there's no negative feedback. There's no negative feedback coming the other way saying, hey, listen, you can't fucking do that. It don't work like that anymore. You're an adult. You must be responsible. I hate gender wars. I hate gender baiting. I hate everything that's to do with splitting men and women apart. I think I'm a cynical guy and I tend towards pessimism. I love pessimism. I find it extremely enjoyable. But on this issue, I'm hopeful that it can be resolved and that men and women can be brought back together in a way that is fair, in a way that is meaningful, in a way that is authentic. But I don't think it's going to be for the majority of the human population. I think it's going to be for a minority of the human population. It is an existential threat. If men and women stay on the path that we are on now in the Anglosphere, and that spreads into Asia and it spreads into South America, and it is spreading, people will say, oh, no, don't worry, the Muslim countries won't be affected like this. I've lived in Muslim countries. I've coached in Muslim countries. I can assure you that the rot is spreading everywhere. Even from the outside, you might say, well, it's an extremely devout religion. The gender roles are so tightly defined. They may be over-defined. That will keep it out. It won't. It won't. Consumerism and the narcissistic psychopathy that's embedded inside of consumerism is so powerful, it will defeat everything. It will overcome every ideology. In the end, I claim. Nothing is strong enough to resist it. And it will be, within a few short years, it will be completely global. Why is that a problem? Well, if men and women split from each other in any meaningful sense, there will be no more humans. We will cease to repopulate. If men and women continue to make children, to make humans together, but they don't live together, well, we have all the research and the statistics for that as well. What we'll end up doing is creating generations of people with a greater tendency towards mental health issues, criminality, and addictions. And I speak as someone coming from a broken family. And I experienced all of this. It's not good for the human condition for people to be rigidly, narcissistically, psychopathically focused on their own pleasure, their own gratification, their own dominance of the world. This is the attitude of a child. What is required is a more of a sane, sober willingness to sacrifice the needs of the individual for the collective good. Where in our culture do you see that being propagated as an idea? I must sacrifice my individual drives and my individual desires for the greater good and for the generations to come. It's there, but these are quiet voices. These are not the loudest voices in the room, and they're not the voices in the room that are receiving the most attention. And I believe that this is probably the greatest threat to humanity that we're facing at the moment. And it's largely due to a kind of psychological, ideological infection that is a byproduct of our technological progress in the form of consumerism and corporatism. There are powers. I don't really know if it's a conspiracy as such. I think that people have conspired. I think there are micro conspiracies within this effect. I think largely it's just an emergent effect with some micro conspiracies, because of course, like, corporations are going to come together and be like, well, we need to sell people more stuff. How are we going to do that? Well, if we tell them this will be the resultant effect. They'll be less happy. People who are agitated buy more. People who are sad buy more. People who are lonely buy more. People who are resentful buy more. People who are, if you're in a negative emotional state, you will buy more stuff trying to feel better. Our economies are hopelessly addicted to consumerism. We couldn't go back to a form of capitalism now where we said, well, you can't advertise to people. You can't market to people. You can't provoke their unconscious desires. You can't propagandize them. You can't manipulate their emotions. You are only allowed to say, we have a product here. You can buy it if you want to. And we're only encouraging people to buy stuff they need, not what they want. That would destroy the global economy as it is. It would destroy it. And we would have to, as a collective, as humanity, we'd have to live with a lot less. Why am I saying this on a video that's about men stuck in savior complexes and stuck in a beta male cuck mindset? To enforce the hard truth that the powers and the pressures that have created this scenario are very, very, very powerful. Just as a final thought, just for something you can start to do as an individual, is just to realize that these powers are out there. The forces of civilization, as is now, the gravity, the wave, as it's rolling forward through time and it's emerging day by day, is going to be non-encouraging towards you acting and thinking and being in the world in a masculine way. So if masculinity is tied, without the possibility of being is inevitably tied to authenticity, every pressure against you is going to be for you to act in a way that is contrary to your true nature. And that means you're always going to be pushed by every force you can name to be less masculine, to be less authentic. Once you realize that that is one of the battles you're in, you can start to say to yourself, okay, I'm now going to try to hold to my authenticity. I'm going to tell myself the truth as much as I can, the whole truth, all of it. I'm going to try to tell other people the truth as much as it's very hard, as much as I possibly can. I'm going to be true to myself and my true nature. This is like I remember Nietzsche writing about this. The crazy, he said, don't be like me. I think it's in Beyond Good and Evil. It's towards the end of the book. Don't be a crazy hermit philosopher like me. Don't live like me, because I've lived against the current of culture. But what I would say is, I don't really know what the options are now, because if you live with the current of culture, you're going to end up with a very artificial version of yourself. You're going to feel alienated from the people around you and alienated from yourself. And you're going to feel fractured, because that isn't you. There's too much masking of how you really feel. One of the things that we'll be doing on this channel, and that is covered in the course that I've created, that's called Awakening Strength, is encouraging men to get back to being in touch with how they actually feel and how they really think about situations beyond masking. It's the masking that's doing the most mental health damage, I believe. It's the masking that stops men from being able to bond effectively and safely with each other and with women. Because how do you bond from a mask? I'm forced into this role of service provider or savior. It doesn't seem like you're interested in who I am beyond the mask. And every time I allow my authentic, vulnerable self to show up, I seem to be punished for that. What am I supposed to do? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. But we must find a way to unmask. We must find a way to reconnect with who we are authentically and emotionally, or we will be doomed. And we don't want to be doomed, do we? No, we don't want to be doomed. That sounds like it would suck. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your attention. And I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you.